Welcome back. So I'm reading a book entitled Duke, A Life of Duke Ellington, and it's written by Teachout. One of the things I enjoy about having access to a good public library is that you can get to borrow a book and you can realize you don't really like it that much, or you like some parts of it and you don't feel bad that you purchased it and now you didn't think it was worth your money. So I am giving that disclaimer because I didn't totally like this book, but a book is supposed to provoke thought. You don't have to like everything about it, but it should force you to think, right? So what I didn't like, let me start with the prologue, the first line. He was the most chronic of procrastinators, a man who never did today what he could put off until next month or next year. That didn't sit well with me. It sounded like fault finding, first line, and it's like, okay, first thing, artists work on inspiration, business people work on time, so it's like you have to wait for the inspiration to do something, right? Also, a white man trying to condense a black man's life into him not doing things on time doesn't sit well with me. But then I did jump into the chapter and I found things useful that I could share. So this chapter is chapter 1, Fortunate Son. Here's always one must read between the lines of Music is My Mistress to get anything useful out of it. On occasion, Ellington let slip a few indiscreet words about the realities of life in Washington, admitting that the black community there was divided into castes, and that if you decided to mix carelessly with another, you would be told that one just did not do that sort of thing. What he took greater care not to say was that his own parents belonged to the in-between caste that became known as the black bourgeoisie. It's impossible to understand the man whom Ellington became without understanding this fact and its implications, yet he did his best to keep anyone from knowing the whole truth about his young years. Throughout his life, he spoke warmly of James Edward Ellington, always known as J.E. or Uncle Ed, that's his dad, and Daisy Kennedy Ellington, his mother, and his praise was fulsome to a fault. What he said has mostly been taken as gospel truth, but there was more and less to J.E. and Daisy than their loyal son admitted. While he was more inclined to prettify than lie outright, the result was the same. See what I'm talking about? That's the little jab here again. It's like, in reality, everyone sees their family in a different way than the family actually was. That's just a part of the maturing process. Continuing. The Ellingtons of Music is My Mistress are candy-coated caricatures whose goodness beggars belief. The first step in understanding their son is to scrub away the sugar and see his parents as they were. Again, that doesn't sit right with me. A white man saying he wants to scrub away the sugar of black people's life. Like, if black people got some sugar in their life, leave them with it, because after hundreds of years of slavery, leave the people with their sugar. J.E. was born in North Carolina in 1879, maybe 13 years out of slavery, and moved to Washington in 1890. He entered the service of Dr. Middleton F. Cuthbert, whom Ellington described as, quote, rather prominent socially. At some point between 1894 and 1898, eventually becoming Dr. Cuthbert's butler. The two men seem to have been on friendly terms. Barry Ulanov, who interviewed Ellington at length for his 1946 biography, described J.E. as the doctor, quote, confidant and very close friend, end quote. Not having gotten beyond grade school, let me pause. Living in a racist society in which access to education was not equal, Yes, he educated himself further by reading the books in the doctor's private library and acquired hand-me-down dishes and cutlery from other families whose parties he catered. Quote, "The way J.E.'s table was set," Duke's son said, "was just like those at which my grandfather had butlered. What I hear here is a man denied education and he sees books, he takes the opportunity to educate himself. A man systematically denied access to resources. He tries to build a life emulating people who had stuff. I see a black man, attempting to thrive while black. It would appear that he also picked up Dr. Cuthbert's high society manners. Whatever its source, J.E.'s suavity impressed all who met him, starting with his children. Ruth Ellington called him, quote, a Chesterfieldian gentleman who wore gloves and spats, end quote. Her brother's memories were more specific and worldly. He was particularly impressed by his father's fancy turns of phrase, which made their way into his own speech. Quote, I've always wanted to be able to be and talk like my pappy. He was a party man, a great dancer, ballroom that is, a connoisseur of vintages, and unsurpassed in creating an aura of conviviality. He was a wonderful wit, and he knew exactly what to say to a lady, high-toned or honey-homey. I wrote a song later with a title suggested by one of those sayings he would address to a lady worth telling she was pretty. Quote, gee, you make that hat look pretty, he would say, end quote. Daisy, his mother, was born in Washington in 1879, again not long out of slavery. Her father was a police captain, one of only 40 black officers in the District of Columbia, and her grandparents included a white senator and a Cherokee Indian. Of course, it included black people too, but he's leaving that part out. In black Washington, that constituted a good family, far better than that of the man she married. Uppity. She was a regular churchgoer and also seems to have been a prude. Ulanoff, possibly following her son's lead, described her as, quote, stiff-lipped and, quote, prim of mien and manner, end quote. Her pince-nez and light-colored skin made Daisy's gentility evident to all who saw her, as did her musical tastes. A competent pianist, she favored salon ballads like Ethelbert Nevin's The Rosary, a favorite of Fitz Kesler and John McCormack, which made her 4-year-old son weep when she played it for him one day. Ulanoff, the biographer that I guess Ellington actually trusted, believes that, quote, the violently crossed influence of his father and mother gave the mature Ellington a startlingly ambivalent personality that was at once introspective and exhibitionist. True or not, Daisy and J.E. were an ill-sorted pair. They even went to different churches, and one wonders what her parents made of their decision to marry in 1898. They also appear to have been sexually incompatible. Mercer Ellington said that they slept apart after Daisy found out that her husband was having an affair with another woman. Though Ellington says nothing disparaging about either of them in his autobiography, he devotes far more space to Daisy, going so far as to claim, quote, no one else but my sister Ruth had a mother as great and as beautiful as mine, end quote. What he found most admirable about his father, by contrast, was his smooth-talking savoir-faire, which he would have endeavored to emulate. Pause one moment here. This man uses such unnecessary words like he's dropping French in there, savoir faire, all kind of know-how, right? Know-how. And it's like, it's okay for him to be so verbose then because he's white, but the black people must be pretentious for wanting to be what? Verbose too? I don't know. Okay, let me go back. What he found most admirable about his father, by contrast, was his smooth-talking savoir-faire, which he would endeavor to emulate. J.E., he said, quote, spent and lived like a man who had money, and he raised his family as though he were a millionaire. But he wasn't. J.E. was in service to a white man, and it was only much later that he struck out on his own, first becoming a full-time caterer during World War I, and then in 1920 taking a job as a maker of blueprints at the Navy Yard. He was in service to a white man because those are the only jobs America allowed for these men to have. He only struck out because those are when it's World War I, white men are gone and they'll allow women and black men to get jobs that they would normally do. Please do not make this history of this country benign when it's always deliberately trying to keep black people down. Moving along. Might Ellington have been embarrassed by his father's pretensions? If so, he never let on. But a later generation was to take a dimmer view of ballroom dancing black men who exalted appearance over reality. E. Franklin Frazier, the chairman of Howard University's sociology department, gave a name to such folk when he published Black Bourgeoisie, the still controversial 1957 study in which he anatomized the world of make-believe in which they sought to escape the disdain of whites and fulfill their wish for status in American life. Malcolm X, born a quarter century after Ellington, wrote with biting contempt in his own autobiography of the lower-tier bourgeoisie of Roxbury, the Boston suburb where he had lived as a boy, quote, I guess that 8 out of 10 of the Hill Negroes of Roxbury, despite the impressive sounding job titles they affected, actually worked as menials and servants. He's in banking, or he is in securities. It sounded as though they were discussing a Rockefeller or a Mellon, and not some gray-headed dignity posturing bank janitor or bond house messenger. So maybe I should go more into this, right? This desire to want to be more than America allows you to. Is this hope casting or is this faking something? I don't know. I'll go deeper into that. Was that how J.E. looked to the fortunate son who spent a lifetime putting the flesh of achievement on the bare bones of his father's hand-me-down manners? Long verbiage to say, and it's a beautiful thought, that his father imagined a life of luxury, and Ellington, he passed the baton to Duke Ellington, giving him such a fine name, Duke Ellington, and he passed that baton on to that child, and that child ran his leg of the race to put the flesh on to what his father dreamed. Ooh. Or did Ellington prefer to think of him not as a make-believe gentleman in spats, but as a dead earnest striver who played his card as well as he could? The only clue to be found in the pages of Music is My Mistress is this line, quote, my mother, as I said before, was beautiful, but my father was only handsome. End quote. It's tempting to hear in those last two words the judgment of a son on the failings of a parent. But if Ellington ever said anything else to anyone else about J.E.'s failings, it went unrecorded. I don't think his father's not being rich, not having stuff and trying to live well was a failing. If you see people in the context of America, an oppressive society that was deliberately preventing black men and women from rising, then what's there to be ashamed of if you see what's really going on? That it's harder for that kind of father to rise up than the white man who's writing about a black man's father. But tell me what you think. Thanks so much for listening.